killing is a basic strategy. I mean, that's what they're trained to do. That's what they do the best. They were never trained to build or to create. They were trained to kill, to take away, to pressure, to confiscate. And that's what we see from time to time, especially now when Russia is involved in a very bloody war, and when 1 million people at least is already killed by this war, Russians, we are not talking about Ukrainians, we are talking about Russians. So 1 million is a lot. It's more than the Soviet Union lost in all other conflicts after the Second World War. So life became cynical, life became very cheap. And that's why we see a lot of killings, arrests, confiscations, taking properties taken away. And we will see it more and more and more.
Hello and welcome to the Putin Files. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by the Russian-American historian and journalist Dr Yuri Felshtinsky, author of the book From Red Terror to Terrorist State, Russia's Secret Service and its Fight for World Domination. Dr Felshtinsky, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
On Monday, the fired Russian transport minister was found shot dead in his car after he was moved out of government in relation to corruption in Russia's Kursk region. What does this say about the way Putin's Kremlin is operating at the moment?
Well, he might be killed. He might commit suicide. Russia is a corrupt society and corrupt economy. We know this. This is not a secret. And it's not very often when people are killed. I mean, we have this news from time to time, but statistically speaking, it's not that there are a lot of people who are killed. But they do kill people when they compete for power, like Navalny, for example, or Boris Nemtsov. And they do kill people when big money is involved. And this is the case, of course, of big money being involved. And once again, everybody who is part of the Russian government, literally everybody, is corrupt. I doubt that there is a single person who is a member of the Russian government. There is a broad, white ruling class of today's Russia who is not corrupt. Putin does not need people who are not corrupt, because then he would have difficulties to work with them and to give them orders. And he indeed prefers people who are corrupt, who he could blackmail, who would have weaknesses. This is his style, and that's why we have a lot of corrupt people around them, and some of them from time to time are either killed or commit suicide.
And it's not just limited to ministers. Just last week, we saw oil CEO Andrei Badlov killed in a fall from his apartment building. This falling from buildings is unfortunately seemingly quite regular thing for Russian elites who get on the wrong side of the Kremlin. Is that what's happened here, do we think?
Well, it's also, greedy people who are trying to, to distribute the wealth. I mean, you see, it's when it becomes difficult to get rich very quickly. The idea of confiscating others' property or taking other property comes to mind. We are dealing mainly with people who came to rule Russia out of the former KGB, current the FSB. So the majority of people who belong to the presidential administration, the majority of people who are ruling major Russian companies, are from the FSB. And these are tough people for whom killing is a basic strategy. I mean, that's what they're trained to do. That's what they do the best. They were never trained to build or to create. They were trained to kill, to take away, to pressure, to confiscate. And that's what we see from time to time, especially now when Russia is involved in a very bloody war, and when 1 million people at least is already killed by this war, Russians, we are not talking about Ukrainians, we are talking about Russians. So 1 million is a lot. It's more than the Soviet Union lost in all other conflicts after the Second World War. So life became cynical, life became very cheap, and that's why we see a lot of killings, arrests, confiscations, taking properties taken away, and we will see it more and more and more. There are laws passed, several laws passed by the Russian parliament offering, or selling to the public the idea of confiscating property of those people who left Russia, for example, uh, as a kind of protest against the war. But they do have businesses left in Russia. They do have, you know, real estate left in Russia. So we're talking about, the idea of confiscation of that property. So we are going to see it more and more and more with war continuing.
And you mentioned the confiscation of assets. Exactly, that happened only earlier this week. Gold tycoon Konstantin Strukov was stopped as he was trying to leave Russia on his plane. He's been put on a travel ban list. He now faces the seizure of his fortune. But he was something of an ally of Putin and the Kremlin. So why do you think they've allowed him to be treated this way by the Russian system, even if he's something of an insider?
Well, all of them supposed to be allies of the president of Russia. Otherwise, they would not be able to continue to stay as rich business people. But again, there are conflicts. There are conflicts between, major former oligarchs and minor former oligarchs. And again, we are not talking about nice people. These people are not nice. They are rude, and they were rude, they are rude, and from time to time, again, we are going to see this fight among them for money, for property, for influence, for being part of inner circle of President Putin. I think during the last 3 years altogether, Russian government confiscated about $50 billion of properties of different people and different businesses. So those confiscations are, going on basically with the start of the war in Ukraine. And again, I think we are going to continue this. I'm kind of surprised that they still keep the borders open. I expect them to close those borders slowly. So I'm not surprised at all that they are starting to cancel foreign passports for particular individuals of Russian citizens. So again, we will see it. It's not going to be better for those who are in Russia, because the Russian government is fighting very difficult war. They do not have enough money. They need a lot of them. They need some businesses to belong to Russia, to the Russian government, because they're kind of strategic businesses. And again, with the war spreading, there are a lot of them. So Russia is going to be less and less open, and it's not a definitely democratic country now, right? But it's still an open country with open borders and without death penalty. This might start to change.
And is there a sign then in this that Putin is really trying to tighten ranks here, or possibly even bring in some sort of crackdown, or are these kind of deaths and confiscations just a sort of normal operating procedure for the Kremlin? I suppose, how should we assess this in the round?
Well, again, the idea of Putin is to recreate the former Soviet Union, and former Soviet Union, of course, existed with the closed borders, with death penalty, etc. And one of Putin's hero, believe it or not, is Stalin, and we see now, some Stalin's monuments coming back into existence because they were taken out, all of them in like 1956, approximately. So that's what is Stalin's. Stalin is a kind of dream for Putin. That's what he would like to achieve. And on those territories which Russia is occupying, every time they move into a territory, whether this is Transnistria in Moldova or South Ossetia in Georgia, they're not actually creating Russia there. They're creating the old Soviet Union in those occupied territories. And in this sense, Moscow and Russia is doing, of course, much better than those territories which are occupied. But the dream of Putin is to recreate the Soviet Union, and he's slowly moving into this direction, and he achieved a lot. Again, especially I have to say that he achieved everything without borders being closed and without introducing of death penalty. Because in Stalin's time, when the Soviet Union existed, when the Soviet Union was involved in wars, the border was closed, there was a death penalty, and Stalin was killing people by millions. And Putin, we have to say, achieved everything without mass terror. And this is an interesting phenomena. I would say this is his price for keeping borders open and his price for allowing people who are unhappy to escape or to emigrate. And a lot of Russians have done this. I mean, we're talking about, probably more, I would say definitely more than a million or two or three. So it's a law. These are those people who would be executed in Stalin's time, right? So instead of killing them, Putin let them go. But the rest of people, unfortunately, mainly kind of comfortable with what is happening in Russia. Not everybody is supporting the war or supporting Putin, but they are like fine. It's fine. Especially because Putin is smart enough not to draft young people from places like Moscow or St. Petersburg. He's trying to take them from a very distant regions of Russia, about those regions about which no one cares actually, no one knows about existence of those territories or those people. And that's how he conducts the war. And again, traditionally, Russia always was losing more people in the war than any other participants. This was always the case. And the life is very cheap traditionally, and somehow that's interesting and surprising to many other countries and many other people. Russians really do not care if they are losing people during the war, because again, historically speaking, there was a lot of terror in Russia all those years. Soviet area was absolutely terrible, and somehow Russians are comfortable with the fact that they killed during the war.
And what message do you think this is going to send to the rest of the oligarchs and elites in Russia? I mean, do you think we could see more of them trying to leave, or is there even a chance of them becoming upset and trying to push back against this tightening of control by the Kremlin?
Well, I think they do have opportunities to leave. They may not be able to take all the money or to transfer all the assets abroad, but if you go to places like Dubai, you will find out that there are a lot of Russian oligarchs. I have to say former oligarchs. There are no oligarchs in Russia anymore. There are some rich people, but even Abramovich is not an oligarch. He's just a rich person since he's a partner of Putin, or Putin is his partner, he's kind of safe. But he's not oligarch. He's not influencing foreign policy, for example, or any policy. And the same has to be said about elite. There is no elite in Russia. Again, there are people who are rich, they're still there. There are people who belong to the ruling class or ruling group. But this is not elite. The entire elite is actually left Russia and live abroad. I mean, those people who traditionally belong to elite of a country, they're abroad. They're not in Russia, not a single one. Yes, we do have. Russia is a very rich country. It was rich, it is rich, and there are a lot of Russian people, and of course it's corrupt. And because it's corrupt, everything is concentrated in the hands of comparatively small group. And that this small group mainly lives in Moscow and from time to time travels abroad, but this became difficult since '92. So they travel into countries where they could, live quietly and without actually being noticed, right? And is it safer for them? Is it safe for them to live in Russia? No, I do not think so. Do they know this? Yes, they do know this, but they're very greedy and they have huge businesses. They have huge amounts of money with which they have to deal in Russia, and it's kind of complicated for them psychologically to leave a major portion of their money and go to a place like Dubai. And besides, they know that probably it's safer for them in Moscow, because if they commit an act of treason from Putin's point of view, then they might end like those who just happened to be dead within the last couple of weeks.
And the fact that these deaths and the seizures as well, and the firing of that minister, they're all connected to sort of sources of revenue for Russia, transport, logistics, gold and oil. That's not necessarily a coincidence, really, is it? You said before that Russia the Kremlin are trying to bring in more money to help fund this conflict. Is that part of what's going on here?
No, I do not think they are trying to bring more money back from abroad. I do not think this is the case. They are trying to take control of the amount of money which is in Russia. But they do this quite successfully. And again, you could be rich, you could live in Russia, spending your money there, but it's not that you can spend a lot of money. I mean, what do you do with them, right? Usually, you would have a jet and yacht, and you travel all over the world, and this became very difficult. So they are limited to their life in Moscow and maybe St. Petersburg. They may travel to places like Dubai or Malaysia, but even Paris and London and New York is now complicated. Private jets, Russian private jets, are not allowed to fly. I mean, they try to cheat. They try to take a foreigner aboard the plane. Literally, that's how they try to do this, right? Pretending that this is a foreigner who is flying the plane, a private jet, and not a Russian citizen. But this, of course, becomes difficult as well, because people are not stupid, and Europe basically prohibits private planes where Russian citizens are on the board, and the same, I think, is happening with the United States. So that's what made their life difficult. They are really sitting in this golden cage in Moscow, but this is golden cage. This is still cage for them.
And on the economy more widely, Donald Trump has told reporters he wants to see sanctions put on Russia after these increasing strikes across cities in Ukraine. Where does that leave Russia if those third party sanctions the US has been debating come into force?
Well, I do not believe Trump will introduce any sanctions against Russia. I think this is all like talking, and he's trying to confuse people. I do not believe them. So far, we see him introducing sanctions against, Japan, North Korea, sorry, South Korea, Europe, Canada, especially Canada, but not against Russia. No, he's not going to do this. I expect him, and this is slowly, he's doing this slowly to take sanctions down against Russia and against Belarus. But there are some hopes and talks that Trump would, start to sell, to supply Ukrainians with weapons again. But this, again, I will believe this only when I see it. So far, everything was done to stop any American assistance to Ukraine, and at this point, it's not continue, unfortunately. And because of this, Ukrainians are put in a very difficult situation. June actually was one of the worst months for them in terms of territory lost to the Russian army. So it is complicated for them because Europe is ready to help and Europe is committed to help, but it's very difficult on practical level. It's very difficult to organize the supply of weapons, so quickly, and to replace American help quickly. Also, again, they are ready to do this, but this may take some time. So we see that Putin is trying to press Ukrainians with bombing cities, and recently he's increasing the level of air attacks, especially drone attacks against Ukrainian cities, and Ukrainians are losing people. He will not be able to take Ukraine. He will not be able to win this war. He will not be able to force Ukrainians to capitulate. But he doesn't believe this. He thinks that if he just bombs them a little bit more, they finally would agree to capitulate, to surrender. Again, this is not going to happen, but Ukrainians are paying, unfortunately, with their life for this war.
And as you say, there is that belief within the Kremlin that, and claim certainly that you hear quite often from the Kremlin, that they can fight this war for as long as they like. They have infinite amounts of supplies, or certainly compared to the West and Ukraine, they have an infinite amount of manpower. But do you really judge that to be true? We're increasingly seeing concerns with the Russian government about inflation, about recruitment as well, not being what it has been in so far in this war. Is there a point at which the Kremlin does have to come to terms with the fact that no nation can fight a war forever?
I think that there is just one point. The strategy has to be changed. And the strategy until recently was based on the idea that Ukrainians should not win this war and Russia should not lose this war. And that's why for more than 3 years we were seeing those limitations which were imposed on Ukraine, that they shouldn't, for example, until recently they had no right to use Western weapons to strike the Russian territory. I mean, it's ridiculous, but that's how it was, right? They could use Western weapons to strike against occupied Ukrainian territories like Crimea, but they were not allowed to use Western weapons for strike against the territory of the Russian Federation. This changed recently, just recently, and I have to add that Russia is a huge country, but this is a country of one city, Moscow. Everybody who was in Russia, everybody who worked in Russia, everybody who visited Russia knows this. The rest of the country is not important. What is important is what's happening in Moscow, because everything is concentrated there. Not just 10% of population, but these are 10% which are, ruling class of Russia, business elite of Russia, financial elite of Russia. I mean, everything is in Moscow, and Moscow is not touched by war until now. Unless this is changed, unless Ukrainians have ability to strike against Moscow, Putin will never stop this war. The moment Ukrainians would have ability and opportunity to strike against Moscow, Putin will stop this war. But this is the only way to stop the war, is to strike against Moscow. I know it sounds kind of radical and extreme, but it is not. Besides, I do not really understand how come Russians are allowed to bomb Kiev like every day, and Ukrainians are not allowed to strike against Moscow. I think this is at least unfair. So this should be corrected. And if Ukrainians start to strike against Moscow, we will see that Putin, will have his reasons to stop the war. Otherwise, this war, yes, will continue forever, because you see, the full-scale invasion started in 22, but actually Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. So if we count from 2014, then this war continues for 12 years now, and it could continue, for 10 or 20 or 30 years. Russia doesn't care, because from Russians' point of view, this is a war conducted not on the territory of Russia. This is a war conducted in a foreign country, Ukraine, and they really do not care how many Ukrainians are killed, how many Russians are killed. As long as they do not feel this war, they do not care. And the only way to force them to feel this war is to start to attack Moscow.
And I suppose, to play devil's advocate here for a moment, some people in the West, probably a lot of people in the Trump administration, would argue that that may be a step too far, and that Russia has threatened before that if Moscow were attacked, or if there were significant strikes on Russian cities, they could respond with a nuclear strike in turn. Do you think those threats have any weight to them?
No, Russia will not use nuclear weapons. If Russia would want to use nuclear weapons, they would do it a long time ago. Because Putin was planning to take Ukraine in a week or two or three, right? And this war, if we count in from 2022, is in its fourth year, and Russia lost 1 million people. Then they're not using nuclear weapons, they will not use nuclear weapons. There are many reasons why they would not do this, but they wouldn't do this. Especially against Ukraine, I have to say. I mean, we may consider possibility of escalating this war into full-scale Third World War. Yeah, this might be possible, and in this case, who knows? But in a format of Russian-Ukrainian war, if they would want to use nuclear weapons, they would do it a long time ago.
Well, Dr. Yuri Felshtinsky, author of the book From Red Terror to Terrorist State, Russia's Secret Service and its Fight for World Domination. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Putin Files.
Thank you very much for your time and invitation.